Natalie or Natalya.
Yes.
Welcome to the podcast.
Thank
you so much for coming on to help promote educating high school kids, college kids, people trying to change careers, giving them a little insight into what you do. So we're going to learn a little bit about that, what you do, why you do that, and, to our viewers and listeners, how they can do it themselves if that's something they choose to do with their life.
Yeah.
So
Thank you. I appreciate being on here in the invite. It's nice.
Yeah, that's cool. Awesome. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Introduce yourself.
In myself, in what I do, just myself. Are we going to wait for the what I do part?
Let's go with yourself. Let's go with yourself.
Okay, so my name's Natalya Buyar. I was born and raised I was born in San Francisco. Then when I was 3 years old, we moved to Roseville. So I grew up in Roseville, grew up going to school in Roseville. Always really loved language, was always really fascinated with language. Grew up in a house where lots of different languages were spoken: English, Ukrainian, Spanish. And so for me, that's always been fascinating. I love working or just spending time with my family, with my friends and kids.
Okay. That's good. So what is it that you do? First of all, what is your title? Senior director to the assistant of what's your job description, I guess?
I'm a speech language pathologist.
Speech language pathologist.
Yes.
SLP.
Yep, there you go.
That's cool.
You got the SLP lingo already.
Okay. Speech language pathologist. Mm-hmm. What do they do? Where do people use them?
Yeah, so that's a big question because we do a lot and we're in a lot of different settings. We work with basically from birth to death. A speech language pathologist is the name. Speech and language pathologist is kind of confining to what we do because we're not only communication experts in the field of communication, but also in the area of swallowing and swallowing disorders, voice.
So throat, like things
basically anything from like here to here. Okay. So your brain, your vocal cords, your breathing, those mechanisms are all connected and intertwined. And so we have our main thing that we're interested in is right here, your vocal tract and all of that, but then also the swallowing process. So we work with younger children, even infants. You find us in hospitals working with in NICUs with newborn children who are very fragile, helping them feed. So helping training moms and babies learning how to feed their children. And then
speech
pathologists do this in the hospitals. Yeah. Wow. So, it's a hard job to get, the working in the NICU. That's a neonatal intensive care unit. For those who don't know. So we work with like babies, infants in the hospitals, but then we also, a lot of children who are like diagnosed with different disorders like autism or cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, lots of other syndromes and disorders that are identified at an early age. We start working on them on speech and language from a very young age. So there's people who work in preschools. And then next up would be working in a school. So that's where I'm at right now. I work
elementary school?
I work at 3 different elementary schools in the Roseville City School District. So I work with children from kindergarten all the way through 5th grade. And we're working on different aspects of speech. So basically their ability to pronounce different sounds. So a lot of kids have a hard time saying the R sound or the S sound, or they have a lisp. And then another aspect of that, we also work with kids who have language disorders. So kids who have difficulty putting together language, putting together sentences.
Define language disorder.
So language disorder, that's a great question. So a lot of the times there's some kids that have difficulty And the cause is unknown a lot of the time. Sometimes it is associated with like autism or another disorder, but language disorders typically are just difficulty putting together language. So whether that be difficulty with vocabulary and defining words, or whether that be putting together sentences and forming sentences, making language, communicating in a way that is effective. There's some kids with, a lot of kids that I work with have autism. And so language is a core part of what is in the part of that diagnosis is difficulties with language. So we work with kids on that. And then
so when I was in elementary school for a couple of years, I think kindergarten first and I think second grade, I was assigned to ESL classes.
Okay.
So is that something you guys do?
So actually, no. That's actually a little bit of a controversy because
so I didn't have a disorder.
Okay. No, you did not have a disorder.
Okay.
So that's actually a big thing, is because there's a lot of, and this has been a big push in our field to reduce the amount of English language learners that are getting identified as having a language disorder when in fact they don't. They're just learning a second language, which is very common. Right. And there's a part of learning a second language where there is difficulty in the second language, obviously, because you haven't learned it yet, right? So a lot of the times, kids who are English language learners will get misidentified as having a language disorder when they really don't. They're just learning a second language.
I would have to agree, because I feel like, for example, instead of having the kids spend time with somebody that speaks their first language, you learn the second language better if you just from exposure.
Exactly. Yeah. And so that's a big part of what school is, and exposing kids to that second language. And where we would come in is if we see that there is a problem or a deficit in not only, as they're learning English, but also in their native language. Okay. If their first
just like
language,
a problem with communicating, period.
Exactly. So if we're seeing problems not only in English, but say, for example, in Ukrainian, if you were growing up and you were having issues with speaking in Ukrainian, then that would be there'd be cause for concern.
Okay. Stuttering.
Yeah, we do that too.
Okay. So how do you fix stuttering?
Stuttering is hard, okay? So stuttering is not an easy thing because there's not always a hard and fast reason behind it. So some people stutter.
There's like this, whatchamacallit, anyways, they say don't this kid stutters because he got scared. Someone scared him.
And sometimes that is true. Sometimes people develop a stutter after they've had some sort of traumatic event, or there's been some psychological trauma, something's happened. Then they do start to stutter. A lot of kids sometimes when going through really a divorce or through a death in the family will sometimes develop a stutter. And a lot of the times when it's related to an event like that, like a traumatic event, it will go away. Oh, but then because as the event resolves itself. But then there are kids that they have what we call it like a developmental stutter. They developmentally, they're stuttering as they're growing older and as they're learning language.
So it just becomes kind of like just a natural part.
Yeah, it's kind of, So stuttering is actually really common for a lot of kids when they're young and when they're learning language, because their brain is so excited and wanting to communicate all these things. But then their mouth, as they're producing this language, isn't able to keep up with what they're saying.
That makes sense.
So it's
My kid does that. And
exactly.
So Mark will start stuttering and Malcolm will be like, Mark, don't say
Yeah. So that's because he's in a really language rich right now age where he's really developing his language and getting excited about talking and communicating. So if that's still he's, 6, 7, 8 years old and still stuttering, then at that point we take another look at it.
Okay. Awesome. Okay. So there's infants, there's school, there's elementary school.
Yeah.
What else?
So
What else do you guys work
we
with?
do the same thing. One thing I wanted to touch on is in the schools, and this is when I say what we work on in elementary school, this also applies to middle schools and high schools.
Okay.
So it goes across the board. We work all throughout the schools. Another thing that we work on is we work with, this is specifically mostly with kids with autism who have difficulties with like socially communicating.
Okay.
So pragmatically,
that was like my next question. I'm like, so has anybody ever asked you like, okay, so I don't know how to talk or make friends with people? Or...
And that's a big part of what we do is helping students who have difficulty like keeping eye contact when they're talking, or even just keeping a conversation going. There's a lot of, kids with autism that have a hard time with taking other people's perspectives, and they just want to talk about what they're interested in. And so teaching them you have to listen and, be interested in what somebody else is talking about. So that's another part of what we do in the schools. Then moving on from out of the schools, speech pathologists also work with, students as they're transitioning out of high school, into adulthood with disabilities, kind of doing the same things. And then the big jump comes when we start working in the hospitals. So there's a lot of SLPs that work in the hospitals, primarily with people who have had strokes, who are sometimes after heart attacks, after
so kind of like a rehab.
Yeah, we work in rehab. We work in like the acute medical setting right after some sort of trauma has happened. And a lot of the times with like degenerative diseases like Parkinson's or ALS, those kinds of diseases where different aspects of the speech mechanism are impacted. So what we do in the hospitals mostly is we do a lot of swallowing assessment, assessing people's swallow. So if you work in like an acute hospital setting, so that means that when a person, that's like right when they come into the hospital, like they're in there, that's either the ER, the ICU, or they're on the floor and they're, they're just incoming patients, right? So a lot of what we do there is assessing, can this person swallow safely?
So like fresh off the gurney, you guys just make sure he's not going to choke on whatever.
Yeah. So after a stroke, making sure that, this person is safe to eat, safe to drink.
Okay.
And so, and in most hospitals, in a lot of hospitals, I don't want to say all hospitals, but I'd say in the majority of hospitals, they actually have a stroke protocol that a speech language pathologist is included on that, where they do an assessment of swallowing. So, so we do a lot of assessment of swallowing, and then we also do swallowing treatment. So helping people who have lost some ability to swallow to exercise those muscles again and be able to swallow. And then also working with...
So I want to interrupt.
Yeah.
So is swallowing like a natural instinct, just like your heartbeat, or is it something that we learn as children? I mean, as an infant, it comes pretty naturally, but do we have to learn that? Can we forget that?
So a part of it is automatic and a part of it is not. Okay. So to a certain extent, so the process of chewing and forming what you call, this is a little gross, but it's called a bolus. So basically, once you've chewed your food, and this, I don't know if this is too much detail, but once you've chewed your food, you form it into like a little ball in your mouth. That part is not what you would say like as like instinct or automatic. That part is actually, you have to think that through, and that's not something
before you swallow.
Exactly. So that's something that you're cognitively aware of that you're doing, and that you can control. You can control your chewing and how you put together the food in your mouth. The part that becomes automatic is once it goes down a certain point and you're swallowing, you can't control whether you swallow or not. You swallow. Yeah. And so there's a certain aspect of, there's a part of the swallowing mechanism that it like flaps over the airway to protect it, so you don't have food going down, because a lot of people don't realize that you have actually two pipes going down your neck. You have your airway, and then you have your esophagus where the food goes down. So in order to prevent food from going down your airway and causing you to choke, which is why if you're eating and you're talking, you're kind of moving that around a little bit, and that's why you'll choke a lot of the times when you're eating.
That makes sense.
And so having that, it's called the
just remembered Mrs. Doubtfire when the guy was choking on a spicy shrimp, but okay.
I don't know that. That's okay.
Mrs. Doubtfire. Okay.
Shout out to her, I guess.
Okay.
So yeah, so that basically your that part of the swallow where it's protecting the airway, you can't control that.
Okay.
So
so kids, elementary school, rehab, and then I'm guessing you work with SPLs, SLPs. Work with probably like people that sing a lot or something, if they need to repair their vocals, this, that.
Yeah.
Any interesting stories you've had?
Yeah. So I think as far as what I'm doing right now, I have a lot of different experiences that I can share. I had a internship in a hospital. So I was working actually in a hospital for a semester, which was really interesting and really cool. I have a funny story I could share that
we love funny stories.
Doesn't really it's more embarrassing for my part. It doesn't tell much about the field. It just shows how I wasn't paying attention.
Okay, share that.
I was working, I was in my first, I think it was already a month into my internship, and it was, working in a hospital is intense. You have to, there's a lot that goes on, and it's a lot for, at least for an SLP, there's a lot more that you have to be aware of and on guard about, because this is where if you do something wrong, you can put somebody's life at risk and they could choke. So I was going through my paperwork and checking and making sure that I'm going to be walking into the, doing my research for who I'm going to be walking into the room for, and, doing all the background stuff. And then I confidently walk into the room, and my supervisor is kind of standing outside the door, and I'm going through all the different questions that we're supposed to go through. And then suddenly, I realized, I'm like, wow, this information that this person is telling me is really not matching up with what the person is saying. This is really interesting. And so my supervisor is like, is this the right room? And I'm like, yeah, no, I totally checked. This is really the right room. Yes, of course.
And it was the wrong room.
And then, it was the wrong room. It was awful. It was really embarrassing. And so I had to apologize to this poor guy. I'm so sorry. He had no swallowing issues at all. He was totally fine. And it was really embarrassing. I almost gave him
people want from me?
A swallowing assessment when he really did not need one. So that's a funny story. I can give you a more interesting story as far as what I actually do on a daily basis.
Okay, daily basis, one example of an interesting, maybe somebody you met or somebody that you were able to help.
So, I think over the course of, this job that I have right now is kind of new and fresh to me. But in my internships, where I've had a little bit more time there to build relationships, I had one particular student who he was very mature for his age. And we were working on language with him and kind of putting together language. And I think why this story is so powerful to me is because it shows just kind of the deeper underlying of what I do and why. And so we were working on language with him, and he came from a really rough background and rough family history, grew up just with his mom, and mom was kind of in and out of jail and on and off of drugs. And he was just such a strong, mature little kid. And I remember like one time during our speech session, we were working on kind of like social language for him. So kind of the, ideas of like, making, reacting appropriately in social situations and like that kind of a thing. And I remember there was one situation where I was giving like, if somebody like accidentally spilled their lunch on you, what would you do?
Yeah.
And he was like, well, I'd turn around and like punch them in the face because, and he started going off and telling me this big story of like how his mom and there was some trouble at home, and there was this person who walked into the house and he was trying to defend his mom and all of this. And it was like, whoa, where did this come from? And so, after the session, I got a chance to talk to him and just be like, hey, like, what's going on at home? And like, what is happening? And, just got to talk to him about like, okay, it's like, how can we process, like if someone scary walks into your house, like what can we do? And so different things like that. So it's not just about like, what I love about my job is that it's not just like, okay, let's teach this kid how to say an R. Let's teach this kid how to say an S. Like for me, what makes me excited to go to work every day is the more underlying, like getting to know these kids, their families, their situations, where they come from, and being able to help them in their real life, not just like, more can you say language. An S or can you say an R, but like really helping them get down to like, this skill is going to help you practically at home. So that's
awesome. Okay. So you already kind of started answering this question.
Oh, great.
But the why. So you touched a little bit on that. Why speech pathology? What got you started? Did you have something else in mind? How did you find out about this? Personally, this is the first time I hear of a speech pathologist. I'm sure other people, first time also. I mean, I didn't know what they were called.
Yeah.
I didn't know they existed, but
I didn't know they existed until I got into college. So this wasn't something.
So do you wish you had a podcast like this that told you before you got into college?
Yes, I do.
That's what I keep telling people.
I was so confused in high school. I had no idea what I wanted to do. And I mean, honestly, I think a part of that is just like developmental. Like you're trying to figure out who you are. And when you're in high school, you don't really know who you are still. You're still trying to figure that out. So I think for me, it came at a really perfect time. I walked into college thinking, so for me, I always knew what I didn't want to do. And I knew kind of vaguely what I wanted out of a job. So I knew I didn't want to do anything like in the science or medical fields. Like that was like, just no, I didn't want to do that. And then I also knew that I really wanted a job where I was able to help people and to serve people in a very unique and specific way. And to work one-on-one with people. I think that was one thing that I was really passionate about, why I even at times even considered like, being a counselor or something like that, just because I really like the one-on-one. But then I was also torn because I'm like, I love teaching. Like I love being up in front of a classroom and talking, and like, I love that part of it too. So that was, for me, I was like, where am I going to find a career like that's going to fit all this? And still for me, one thing I think that was the most important was, how can I have a job, a profession for me that is my ministry and that I can serve God through? Because that for me was the biggest thing, was how can I use what I'm doing to bring glory to God and to serve other people and to love other people through what I'm doing? So that for me was the big thing. So I walked into college and I thought I was going to be an English teacher. I had just yes, I thought I was going to be English teacher.
Language arts.
Yes. And because I was coming back from a missions trip and I was like, they don't have like really good like schools there and like English teachers. I'm going to go back and I'm going to be an English teacher in Malawi, Africa. And I was like, I got back to Sac State. I started my first semester, was in the first semester. And then by the second semester of taking those English classes, I was like, not completely what I want to do. And so at that same time, I was taking a linguistic anthropology class at Sac State. 10 out of 10 recommend. So good. It was so interesting to me. It was such an interesting class. And it was like a light bulb moment for me in that class. I was like, this is what I'm interested in.
Awesome.
Not necessarily the whole like literature and like, though I love reading, but that's not what I was passionate about. I was like, I don't want to teach people about books all day long. I want to teach people about language. I want people to communicate. That's what I like to do. I like to talk. So I'm like, I want to help other people talk. Yeah. So I didn't realize all the different like aspects of linguistics and how it branched out. So I started to like look at I looked up linguistics and all the different jobs related to it. Yeah. And so I then at that point found in that search, I found speech pathology. And so I was like, there's going to be no way that like this is such a small little thing, such a small little field I've never even heard of. There's no way that this is going to actually be like a major at Sac State.
Like how many jobs are there for a speech pathologist?
Like, right? I was like, this is so tiny. So I looked into it, and Sac State actually did have a program. And so I was like, wow, this is awesome. So I started the program at Sac State. I got into it, absolutely loved it. And then I think that like when I started out, I was more interested in like the language aspect of it. Okay. But then as I went along in my education, and then when I went to grad school at Biola, I think that that's when my why changed. Okay. So I think before I was doing it because I was interested in language. Now, if you ask me why do you do what you do, it would be because I feel like God's given me such a love and like seeing people who have special needs, who have different challenges, even just communicating, like basically communicating. They may not even have like any other disorders or anything like that. Just giving, I love the underdog, like the ones that are kind of people don't expect, you know, and the people that are kind of like outcasted and, you know, maybe kept in a separate classroom or, you know, kind of the quiet kids at the back of the classroom. Like, I love that. Like, I love taking those kids and like seeing them grow.
And those people are usually the most fun to hang out with.
They are.
Because
they're
so genuine with you. You know, they're like, wow, this person accepts me. And then they just open up in front of you and you guys are like best friends in 5 minutes.
Exactly. And that's what awesome. I love about it. I think that's the biggest thing for me now is just helping kids kind of blossom and giving them the tools to communicate. I think that's the biggest thing for me.
That's awesome. Okay, so wrapping up, but like I said, this is the first time I hear of a speech pathologist. But maybe there's somebody out there that's looking for, you know, like you started college, you didn't know what you wanted to be. You wanted to be an English major or a teacher, teaching. But now they found out, what are some, like you said, you recommended a linguistic anthropology. What are some other courses or things they can take to kind of experience it, dip their toes and see, is this what I want to do?
Yeah.
You know?
So I think the best way to start is not in a class.
Okay.
I think that the best way to start is actually going and seeing it. You can take a lot of classes that talk about theoretical stuff, but once you get into it, it is totally different. And there's a lot of people that take classes about theoretical things, and then when they get into the practical, they don't like it. And so what I recommend is, you know, going to an elementary school, going to a hospital, volunteering, seeing what this is about. There's lots of programs. I know that even like at Sac State, I don't know if this is still around, but I know when I was there, they had what was called the Autism Center for Excellence. And so basically it's a program, like an after school program for kids with autism, and where you can volunteer to work there with kids with autism. And it gives you a great taste of what working with kids with that diagnosis is like. So doing something like that, finding different programs that work with kids with special needs, volunteering in that, seeing what it's like in the hospital. Like if you're interested in going medical, but you're like, maybe I don't want to be a nurse, or maybe I don't want to be a doctor, maybe I want to do something more specialized. Volunteering, seeing, asking. There's a lot of the times there's opportunities for that in hospitals and in schools. So that's my recommendation. Go see it.
Okay. So say one of our viewers or listeners is in high school and they're taking AP classes, right? Are there certain classes that can expose them to something like this? I know there's like psychology and language arts, which is kind of a general thing.
Yeah.
But is there anything they could do in high school to? I mean, yes, practical is probably best. Go on a mission trip or go volunteer, help out, like you said. But is a college? What university did you go to?
I went to Sac State for my undergrad, and then I went to Biola University down in Southern California.
Biola, what is Biola looking for? Are they looking for a degree from Sac State? Is Sac State looking for some prerequisites?
So to get into an undergrad program, basically anywhere, there are basic prerequisites. You have to take a basic psychology course. You have to take a basic human development course. You have to take either a physics or a chemistry class, and then you have to take a biology class and a sign language class. So those are kind of the basic prerequisites to get into an undergrad program. And I mean, but those are basic prerequisites to get into a lot of different programs nowadays, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, as far as you were talking about in high school, I think that the best approach, I mean, taking something like AP psychology would be great. I'm not exactly 100% sure what kind of AP classes are offered across the board, but I think in high school, developing like good work ethic, and
what's work ethic?
Oh,
you know.
Like being motivated to do things that are hard, and not shrinking back from things that are hard, because I think that's a problem. And I think what makes me sad, and a part of the reason why I'm even here, is that I want to encourage people that you don't shrink back from doing something that might seem like it's hard, or might seem like you have to put in effort into it. Like, don't be afraid to do that. Don't be afraid to put in the time, to put in the effort, because it reaps really great reward. Like, I'm doing something that I love. I go to work every single day.
Nothing good is cheap, right?
Exactly. I go to work every day and I love what I do, but I could have chosen something else that was easier. And maybe I would have loved it, but maybe not, And so I think that's the biggest thing is, whatever you're doing, like, go after it and pursue it hard. Like, don't go half-heartedly at it. And if you want to do something, like, do it. Don't shrink back in fear. Fear is not going to leave you in a good place later on.
Fear is a liar. Fear is a liar. Alrighty. Well, Natalie, thank you. Or Natalya.
Yes.
Again, thank you so much for coming on. Honestly, I really appreciated this, and I bet you, our viewers, listeners, did as well. If they have questions, they will be sure to comment below, and I'll forward them to you, and maybe we can, follow up
Absolutely.
with some answers.
I'm a huge supporter of the field, so if you have any questions,
Awesome.
please
Awesome. Thank you. Alrighty.